Good morning, YouTubers. This is Jason Dean at Film Fanatic. Hope everyone's doing good. I want to thank everybody for checking out the channel. It's been growing slowly, so it's been really cool. Some videos have been getting a lot of hits and a lot of views. So this has been a really great time. There's some cool things happening. One of the things that I'm really excited about is I'm going to have a special guest here, probably not for a few more weeks or so, but it could be about a month. It could be at the end of the month of actually October. But I'm going to be getting a. I just did a show, well, a series on Film Fanatic about the entire franchise of Friday 13th, which was in total was about 14 movies. So I covered all the movies in the box set that I have that had 8 movies, and then the additional grouping of films were separate from that. And I can, start off with the the first one, the one that started all, the original one, Friday 13th, and then I concluded with the very last one that came out about 13 years ago, which was also called Friday 13th, which was like kind of regarded, I guess, as like a reboot. The same director who made the Friday 13th reboot, Marcus Nispel, I believe, he also directed the Texas Chainsaw Massacre reboot. So that was the conclusion to the show. So the thing that's going to be, well, getting back to the Friday 13th, Marcus Nispel, I thought, it's funny to think that that movie now is like 14 years old, but or maybe a little less, but it's a very modern. It was done. It was produced by Michael Bay, and the typical thing or the aesthetic around a lot of the Friday 13th movies is that they're pretty much like exploitation movies. They're super low budget. They're super cheesy and hilarious and fun, super gory, lots of great kills. That's always been a deep love of mine, that whole franchise. But typically they have incredibly low budgets. So with Michael Bay on board, who's known for these big giant Hollywood blockbusters such as like Armageddon and Con Air and Transformer movies, and then he was also in that big giant, which I can't think of it, the big giant UFO movie with Will Smith, Independence Day. So he's responsible for making or producing or being involved to some capacity, usually producing, and he's also directed movies. But typically his films are like giant, overstuffed budgets. But some of them I really like, and it's kind of the complete opposite of the spectrum as compared to, say, some of these films I've been doing reviews on. Mostly like films in the exploitation world. And I definitely consider the franchise of Friday 13th to fall under that or to be to fall under that umbrella, just because they were so influential on the whole slasher craze that happened in the 80s. I think if that franchise never existed, to a degree, the landscape of horror cinema would be vastly different. It would still be a thing, and I think it still would be great. But I think that really ushered in when the first movie came out, first Friday 13th, and then it became a franchise. That really ushered in like a whole new period of filmmaking history, as far as like the slasher exploitation world and everything that came after that. Even to this day, I mean, countless horror films are always they reference Friday 13th in some way, or they take an idea or steal an idea from those films. So I thought that conclusion, the last movie, was an interesting combination, because not only was it obviously it had the biggest budget for any of the movies in the franchise, which I thought like initially kind of defeats the purpose, because those movies are kind of low down and kind of rough and dirty and super low budget, and all in camera effects and everything. total contrast to say a movie like Independence Day. But I thought Marcus Nispel did a really great job with, although on one side it's on one part of the spectrum it's incredibly the production value is kind of through the roof, and it's like really you can really see the money in the film. But I also thought the cool thing about it was not Marcus Nispel was able to still give the movie a real gritty, kind of raw, almost low budget quality, even though considering the production value was really high. So it was a really cool balance. Like it didn't lose that grit, and I thought it had that that rawness and the campiness of the originals, even though it had millions and millions of dollars behind it. And I just recently I did a show also on the Friday 13th, the first one, and I kind of talked. I did a little bit of a show on the franchise also. Um, and for some reason, I was really late to the game. I don't know what it was. I had seen the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake, and I don't know. I just might have been just the state of mind I was in because I love that movie so much. It's such an influence on me, and such a movie and such a movie that means a lot to me. And I don't know. So I had this wall up against anybody kind of trying to tread that ground again and doing a remake. But it was funny when I was doing the shows on Friday the 13th, and I concluded with the last one. I was like, okay, this is a newer director, Marcus Nispel, and I knew I heard that name, and he's done, he's done a lot of higher, big budget horror films, or at least a few. And I realized I had a copy. I just bought a copy of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake. I bought it at like Goodwill last month, and I'd only seen bits and pieces of it. I was never really impressed or into it, or I don't know. It was funny. It was a weird reaction. And I realized, oh wait, that's the same director that did the Friday the 13th movie, Marcus Nispel. So I was like, I really liked that movie. So I was like, I need to give this a chance. And so I watched his Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake, which actually came out before Friday the 13th. And I really liked it. I was really impressed. Same kind of thing in a lot of ways because it had this big budget. It was also produced by Michael Bay, and it had this really huge budget, but yet it was super raw, super low down and dirty. And I thought it was really gritty, and it had that cool balance again of where it was kind of highbrow horror with an incredibly overstuffed budget, but yet it retained this really gritty aesthetic to it, which I thought was cool. I was really impressed with it, and I thought too the other thing about both of those movies is that it pays homage to the original and to the franchise, but it also gives you something different. It's not I guess, a reboot or a remake in the traditional sense of where it's like more or less scene by scene or shot by shot or following exactly the order of the storyline of the original story. It does do that to a degree, but it gives you something new and fresh, and I was really impressed with it. So I'm going to do a show on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake because I was really impressed with it. So, but very cool. But anyway, so I hope everyone's doing good. It's Friday, and so yeah, today or tonight is going to be trying to do a lot of promotion, get some folks out because it's something new and different and it's exciting. But tonight is going to be the big show at Ada's Kitchen in Rockland, and it's a show I put together. Originally, it was going to be. I reached out to Ada's quite a few months ago about doing a show there. Well, it was funny. It was actually maybe 2 years ago. It was kind of around the time when the summer before last actually things started opening up a little bit more, and there was a little bit more. There was definitely a few more opportunities for musicians to kind of get back at playing music. And I remember sending them. I got in contact with Ada's, and I remember sending them some videos and some clips, and we were kind of talking about it. And at that time, uh, they seemed to be into the material that I sent them, but they kind of just basically said they didn't think it would be a good fit because it was too, I don't know, too fringe or just something a little bit too different. So it was, it was an interesting, but I was glad that they got back to me and they gave me feedback right away. So just kind of put it on the back burner for a while. And since then I played a few gigs there with a couple other bands, and there was a new management team in there that was put in to Ada's fairly recently, and a few friends and musicians who also do electronic music. We've been brainstorming about maybe doing a show where we could do some kind of thing where we all play together at a venue, and that maybe it could, if we were able to make it into a success, maybe we could do it, a few times a year or bi-monthly, like something maybe through the winter, because there's not really a scene for that around here. I mean, there are people doing that kind of music, and there are a lot of people who love that kind of music, but there's not necessarily a place to go to see it more than once, or really, quite frankly, there isn't any place that offers that as an option. We play, with Quantum, we play a lot of shows. We play a lot of outdoor kinds of shows, mostly at Lulu's, and we kind of do our own thing, and it's been great and wonderful. But we were kind of thinking about like maybe reconnecting or connecting with other people who are also playing similar music and trying to build upon it. So it kind of, moved to a place of where we had this new idea, and I approached Ada's about it just fairly recently, and they were really into the idea. And initially, they were going to book the situation of just having us play as Quantum, and then this other idea came out of while I was talking with them about that, about getting other people involved. So it all worked out, and we're going to be doing it tonight at 8:30. So we're going to be doing a set as Quantum, and then my really great friend, who really, this was like the probably, well, for me it was like the main reason to really try to try something new and try something different, and try to push it a little bit more and be a little bit more proactive of trying to get it to happen. My really great friend Eric Halsey, who is an amazing bass player, amazing musician, super cool guy. He does all this great electronic music, and I've been listening to a lot of his stuff for probably 2 years, because he basically has a SoundCloud page, and then he has an Instagram account, and he uploads videos of his music on those two pages, especially on Instagram. And we always have this ongoing joke with him that, like, it's the only reason to really have Instagram is to watch Halsey's videos, because it's great. It's super super funky, kind of futuristic, sci-fi electronic, with a big like Thundercat influence, one of the greatest musicians around. And Halsey's really into a lot of hip hop and funk, so that kind of throws is thrown into the mix, and it's very electronic, but then it's live because he's playing a lot of live bass and synths. So it's a cool combination of live and synthetic or uh, electronic elements. It's a cool balance, organic and not quite organic, but yet it's funky. And I mean, that's one of the things I try to do with Quantum, and it's up to people if they think it's successful or not. But that's one of the things that, I try to do with Quantum, because we do a lot of this, like a lot of the stuff that we do is electronic based. But what we try to do is I always tried to, I always envisioned the band, like if we did it as a band before the band was actually started, we could get away from the idea of showing up to a gig or a performance with a couple of laptops and have the tracks, have things mapped out and have things set and ready to go, essentially like setting up backtracks, and then you go and perform, and you have your laptop, and then you kind of improvise or add things as you go. And but it's strictly a digital kind of thing where there's not necessarily any like live instruments or things of that nature. And what I wanted to do was to try to like, and it's a funny thing because I know a lot of friends and people that I know really love electronic music, and they love to go when there's a chance to go see a DJ, like a house music DJ. They'll do it. There used to be. I was talking about it with a friend the other night at the Three Tides, which is an awesome venue here in Belfast. It's been around for quite a few years, but back in the day, they used to have this thing called Snowed In, and it was basically every year they would do it, and it would be like in January, and they'd have these three DJs that would come to perform at Three Tides, and there were these really great DJs that played this really cool house music stuff, and they play electro and breakbeat stuff, and it was just killer. And it was always a fun time. It was crazy, and lots of people would show up, and it was a full on dance party. And it was just awesome. But these guys were like essentially DJs. They would do some remixing of their tracks, of other people's tracks. But the thing that was so cool about it was, everybody and their grandmother would show up. And the thing that was funny was that I always ran into, and I would go to it all the time, and it was always a regular thing, and it was always like, just have so many great memories of that period. And I had experience, growing up. I'd gone to a few raves, and I'd, gone to see DJs here and there, and went to a couple of really cool things in New York City growing up, and I had some really great experiences. But mostly, I was always going to that. Like that was the thing I always went to, and it was really great. But the thing that always I came across was like, I personally didn't really know any friends that were into electronic music. Like in that kind of setting, they would go to it, drink some beers, sometimes get very inebriated, and dance and go crazy. But it was never something outside of the party atmosphere. It was never a music that they would listen to or actually dig or buy, or music that they would buy. For me, it's like it's a music that I legitimately love, and I love all kinds of music, but electronic music's my favorite. So it's music that I actually buy, listen to on a regular basis. I don't have to be in this crazed party, you know, mode to dig it. I actually listen to it, you know, all the time. And I understand. I think it's like the ultimate, in a lot of ways, some of the ultimate party music. But at the same time, it was always a funny thing because I never had was in connection with friends that actually dug it, you know, outside of that and listened to it and considered themselves to be electronic music fans. And so one of the things I always thought was like after years of seeing DJs and people play doing electronic music, and I've gone to a lot of shows where I've seen actual electronic artists where they're creating their own music as opposed to DJing. And one of the things I always saw a lot of the times growing up was that a lot of the times the setting was always the same, whether it was an electronic group like say a duo or even a trio or a solo person. The setup around the aesthetics was kind of always the same. It was basically either a guy or girl or guys or two girls setting up with, you know, essentially a couple turntables, a mixer, and a PA system. So a lot of times vinyl too, which would be really cool, and laptops. And with the digital age, that ushered into, you know, lots of things for DJs where things became a lot easier. Where people, you know, when they were mixing tracks, you know, part of the art form of DJing is you know being able to mix the tracks and create the seamless mix and matching, like beat matching, where you're taking, you know, like say you find a tune that's a dance tune and you're trying to correlate that with other music that's in the same tempo or maybe in the same style. And beat matching is where you're trying to match, like say if a track is at like 122 beats per minute, you want to try to get the next track to kind of be in that same vicinity or matching up so you can you can segue the tunes and crossfade back into it. So it's beat matching, and then there's all these tricks that you can do with crossfading and effects and all these things, and it's a world of fun. And in itself, it's an art form. But with the digital age, it's gotten way easier, I think, for people to be able to do that. Where people now have programs where that would DJ, and I came across it more and more, which is really cool. But it's also to to a degree, I feel like it defeats the purpose of the magic of DJing. Is basically you can have these systems now that or programs that the beat matching process and even mixing tracks that are in the same key of each other can kind of be done before you, and you're kind of everything is kind of preset, and you're mixing things on the fly. But that kind of work, which is really tricky, can be done before, and you showing up and you're basically plugging in your stuff and doing it, and it can be really great. I remember a DJ when that whole thing came about. It was probably about 10 years ago, and this guy who I know who's a really great DJ. I remember, I used to see him play, and I was like, this is really cool. Owen Cartwright. He used to have this amazing group called the Vistas that were just such a great electronic group, and they played all original music. But he DJs, and I think he still DJs now. But I remember when this newer technology came out, I remember watching him set up his laptop and queuing up all these tracks. And I remember like asking him about it, and it was like, wow, like you can actually sync everything up in this preliminary stage and just basically plug in essentially kind of a bastardized playlist. And I was like, that's really cool. And I kind of thought, well, that is cool, but then it's not really DJing because that's part of the level of fun or where it's kind of unpredictable is trying to do everything on the fly. So, but there are people who still do things in a traditional sense of where they're not using technology in that way to mix music. But the other thing too is that's funny is when I started seeing groups that do original bass material and say DJs, their essential setups were the same. They were basically showing up with like laptops or their hardware or the software programs and the mixer and all those kinds of things or turntables. And there was never a thing of where, uh, you know, things were being done necessarily in a moment. It's particularly around original based stuff that I remember seeing where a lot of guys like the music was really great. A lot of guys and girls that I've seen that were doing like original stuff. They were kind of going in with like having these backtracks. Basically, they would sing or do other things, but the backbone of all of the tracks and the tunes that they were going to be presenting were all like done beforehand, and everything was mixed, and they basically were plugging in and then playing that mix live. They weren't creating that stuff on stage. And I remember after a while of seeing that, like I love that kind of music, but then I was always interested in the idea of well, and the other thing that a lot of people started to have this notion that you know who are not open to electronic music because of that aspect, because there's not somebody playing on stage with an actual live instrument like singing or playing guitar or whatnot or playing drums. They they have this notion or this idea in their head that well it's not really music because it's all like synthetic. It's not real music, and music that is only done by an acoustic piano or a keyboard or drums or guitar or live vocals like that's or seeing a rock band or whatnot like that's real music because it's actual people in the flesh playing an instrument. So they had this wall against certain kinds of electronic music or electronic music in general where well it's all synthetic, it's all processed, it's not real music. And for me it's like it doesn't matter if it's like if you get a really cool sound out of a computer or a synth or whatever, and if it creates a sound for you that is soothing or engages you, to me that's music, and it's all it's all and that individual experience of how that if it resonates with you. But to me it doesn't matter if it's play it on a guitar or a keyboard or a drum machine or whatever. But if it resonates with you and it makes you feel good, that's all that matters. It doesn't matter where it's being made through. But that's just my own thing. So one of the things that I thought that I wanted to try to do when I was putting together Quantum is to try to like get away from that and try to make things as live as possible and actually have live instruments being played and having things done. And one of the big things that we did was when my friend Mike Whitehead, who produces and records all of our albums, he's a primarily a trumpet player, but he started playing bass, and then a few years after that, we had started the band. So we had this like crazy idea of like having him be part of the band, but he'd play live bass for the band in an electronic music context. So I was like, that's interesting. And then I thought, well, because my main instrument is drum set and percussion, I'm going to try to incorporate some live drums and percussion into the mix. And then with the keyboards, and then I was starting to incorporate vocals and looping things. I started to try to get in the space of where we could loop live, live vocals or and play keyboards and play some drums and have everything like basically go into a situation, to a gig or whatnot, of where there's nothing is preset, as far as none of the work has been done before. Like everything that we're doing is going to be in that moment. You know, some most of the stuff is very rehearsed and worked out, but we're going to start essentially with a blank slate, and everything is going to be done there. So I wanted to try to do it, and when I created the band, it was to try to create everything as much as I could in the moment, but then have that idea of where it's definitely electronic and there's a lot of synthetic stuff, but have it with give it this essence like you're kind of seeing a live rock band. To try to do everything as live as we could, and to try to give it that rawness or that human kind of feel. So I mean, that's kind of what we've been doing since we've died, and I've kind of have focused more and more on that, how to make things as organic as possible. And the other thing, that people assume, when they see somebody behind a deck, that you're just DJing or a computer. And it's like, it's not really DJing. I mean, DJing is, well, the best way I've heard it explained is one of my favorite electronic artists is Sasha, who's like a world-renowned electronic DJ, producer, writer. He was one of the first guys to ever use Ableton. He was one of the first electronic artists to put out. He was a very well known, very well respected DJ in the world, and he was one of the first ones to kind of break away from DJing and to start putting out original music. Air Drone Dagger, and it's one of my favorite albums of all time. But I remember he was talking about DJing as like this middleman culture, where basically, you're the DJ, but you're curating these different styles of music and you're putting them all together, but you're in the middle. You're not really representing, like, it's not really yourself. You're expressing yourself through mixing other people's music, but it's not yourself. So he was trying to break away from that and do all original music. So that's kind of what we've been doing and trying to do. And, it's up to people if they like it or not. They might like it or they might not like it. But that's kind of what we've been doing for a while. And with Halsey, with what he does, all of the videos and things that I've seen of his, is he really focuses on that same kind of thing, where a lot of the stuff is all live, and then he incorporates live bass because he's such an amazing musician, and everything is live, even though he has, he's using a drum machine or some synth patches or some things that maybe were done beforehand, but it's really live. So to me, that's really the coolest part of it. So yeah, and then also joining us tonight who's going to be kicking things off is Spencer Roulard, who's got this really great project that's all like this modular synth stuff, and he's going to be doing like a modular kind of ambient set in the beginning, and that should be pretty wild. I'm really looking forward to that. So if you're free and want to check out something new and original, that's maybe something you're not going to always see, come on out tonight. It starts at 8:30, so it'll be a great time. So I did this movie here, well, it's actually two movies, Two Undercover Angels and Kiss Me Monster, by the Spanish exploitation director Jess Franco. I just did a review the other day on Angel of Death, which was another Jess Franco film, and it's an incredible movie. I was super so into it, and looking forward to watching it again. It's such a great movie. He did this movie, Angel of Death. It's really great, like Nazi exploitation film. And so I'd been hearing about Jess Franco for quite a while, and so I saw Angel of Death in the store about a couple of months ago, and I bought it without seeing it, and I was really blown away. And I did some research about Jess Franco, and I'm like, wow, okay, there are films of his that I saw. He did some work with Christopher Lee earlier in his career, who Christopher Lee is most well known for the Hammer films that came out in England in like the 60s and the 70s, like just classic gothic Dracula movies. And Christopher Lee was, probably for me the most iconic and the greatest Dracula ever to grace the screen. But he collaborated and did some a few different movies with Christopher Lee, and particularly he did a Dracula movie with him. And now I remember when I was going through all the films that Jess Franco had done, I was like, oh yeah, I remember seeing this as a kid, because anything with Christopher Lee when I was a kid, I was like, checking out and devouring. So I had seen some of his films, but then I realized like Jess Franco's career is insane. Like one guy that I check out on YouTube on how he got me back interested into, or sparked my interest into checking out his films, Moods, who I've talked a lot about. He owned like about 80 of his films, and I was like, wow, like that's pretty hardcore. I have three, so I dove back into like checking out how many movies this guy actually had, and is close to about 120 movies, like prolific director. He was notorious for making movies, like literally shooting two movies back to back. So sometimes he would go through these bouts of where he would come out with a movie every year. And he did all multiple genres. I mean, he was an exploitation director, but he did like Angel of Death, which is like a Nazi exploitation, but he did a lot of horror exploitation movies, crime, spy exploitation movies, and then always had elements of sex exploitation, gothic. I mean, you name it. He crossed all these different genres. But he always had. It seems like he always had some kind of horror element or violent aspect to a lot of his films. But these two films here, Two Undercover Angels, Kiss Me Monster, were both some two movies from his like early part of his career. He started making movies like in the late 50s through the 60s, and then 70s and 80s, and then even into the 90s, which is wild. And he died about, I guess, in 2013. But super prolific Spanish director, and I mean the amount of movies and the amount of work that he put out was just fantastic. And this movie, it's just an incredible movie. I had never seen this, but I've been eager to check out more of his films and to buy them. And both of these films, Undercover Angels, or Two Undercover Angels, came out in 1967, and then Kiss Me Monster also came out in 1967. And they both star. They were directed by Adrian Hoven, and they starred Janine Renaud and Rosanna Yanni. And these were both actresses of the time that were in the 60s that did lots of exploitation movies. And they were just like basically these two beautiful, incredibly sexy supermodels. on the screen, and but they were great, and they had a really big career in the exploitation world. They were like in many films. I have another film, and Adrian Hoven is a director that worked a lot uh, with Jess Franco, and I have a couple of his films. He also directed this movie that I did a show quite a while back on, the House of the Creeping Flesh, which also stars um, Janine Riode, who's and also has a lot of the cast. Certain some of the actors and actresses in these films are also in House of the Creeping Flesh, which is such an amazing movie. It's just like really creepy, gothic exploitation movie, and it's pretty disturbing. And I that was the first movie I saw with Adrian Holven. Really great, just awesome movie. And I bought a few of his other films since then. But he worked a lot with Jess Franco, and he directed these films. And yeah, I don't. They're so they're both these films are so they just pop so much off the like they pop off the screen. Like there's so much beautiful. The cinematography is so cool. There's the lighting. It's got this real intense kind of pulpy vibe to it. The music is just incredible. It's the late '60s, so everything has that kind of sound to it. But the colors are just amazing, and it's basically centered on these two women who are like kind of the heroes, and they're the centerpiece of the film. Jess Franco too was one of the first directors of where he took kind of the spy genre, and instead of having it dominated by men, like say James Bond, he he thought it'd be way more interesting and just kind of cool, a little bit more cool to have the main characters be women. So he was one of the first filmmakers to kind of usher that in, of where the leading ladies could be like the main figures who carry the story, and that they're like the strongest people in the story. And these films are just so wild, and they're they're just popping with life. Like they have definitely there's like degrees of suspense. There's lots of cool, and there's definitely horror elements, particularly in Two Undercover Angels. They're incredibly surreal. There's times where it's well with Kiss Me Monster. There's times in that film of where it doesn't really make sense, and you're kind of like it's very disorienting because it's very psychedelic. It's got this real surrealist quality to it, and there's all these different elements. There's elements of horror. There's elements of suspense. It's like a thriller. It's a mystery, but then it's also very pulpy. It's very funny. It's super silly and goofy, and then it's really bizarre. And it combined, and it's got elements of horror, so it has all of these different elements kind of tied together, and it's so interesting. But visually, it's unbelievable, and the music is just so great, and it's such a great kind of pulpy exploitation experience. Um, and the transfer of these both this was a great collection. I actually just picked this up the other day. So, and I didn't realize when I bought it, but it had two Jess Franco movies on it. And then it comes to the bonus disc where, and I just finished that last night, where that's got these great interviews with Jess Franco. Super interesting, super cool, and he just an incredible long history he had. He grew up in Spain, and he lived under the Franco regime, which was one of the most one of the he was one of the most was hardcore fascist governments at the time. Totally militarized. And he talks a lot about when he fled Spain to be able to create his own art and create films, because he was like you know completely censored in every way, and people had no their basic freedoms are ripped away, and people are being kidnapped and you know, just tortured. And he fled Spain, and then like all his films got banned. And then it wasn't until years later, after the fall of Franco, that his films were acknowledged again and shown. And then years and years later, he had this like second career and a second life. But super interesting. And he talks a lot about where he also worked with Orson Welles, which I thought was super fascinating. Um, he worked with Orson Welles on a movie called Chimes at Midnight and Treasure Island with Welles in 1964. And the film, it was aborted. It was basically everything came to this T of where it was became this disaster, and the film was like never released. Um, but Treasure Island, I believe that came out. But Orson Welles was the star of it, and yeah, pretty interesting hearing him talk about his relationship with Orson Welles. Like he referred to Orson Welles like when he worked with him as like the boss. Like he looked up to him so much and like really listened to him to his advice on the set when he was trying to make this movie that eventually wasn't really released and became this kind of disaster for various reasons. But his discography, all his films, I mean, the list is amazing. Like, he's really well known for the Necronomicon, which came out in 1967. Count Dracula, like I mentioned, 1969 with Christopher Lee. Vampire Lesbos, which is a great classic movie. I remember seeing that also in 1970. Dracula vs. Frankenstein in 71. Remember seeing that one. Oasis of the Zombies in 1983. So just so many movies, so many movies. And this was unlike, they have elements of horror, but very very different. They have elements, like I said, of like more. They play out more like a thriller, and they're very surrealist elements, but with elements of horror. But these are very different, but super fun, incredible movies. Like visually, it's such a cool presentation, or the way the films were shot, that you could literally just throw this on and turn off the voice, and just like watch it. It's like kind of a crosses this line because it's super low budget, and it's definitely like exploitation. And there's like, there's it's got elements of sex exploitation. It's kind of sleazy at times, and it's pretty dark. It's pretty weird, pretty mysterious. But then it's also super silly. Um, but it's almost the way the cinematography works is almost a character for these movies. It feels like it could be almost considered to be like, even though it's like grindhouse kind of sleaze, it was considered to be like art house. It's just beautiful, both these films. So yeah, I highly recommend checking out Jess Franco. He's kind of the man. So I'm gonna start checking out more of his stuff and trying to seek out a lot of his films. And there's so many. It's just super cool. But yeah, this is Jason Dean. So thanks again for the support. And if you get a chance, like and subscribe to my channel, Jason Dean, YouTube, Film Fanatic. Thanks again, and we'll see you soon. Bye.